The house was a 3-story Georgian townhouse, painted bone white, its gravel driveway lined with clipped hedges and whispering trees. I paused at the gate, drew in a deep breath, and stepped forward. The crunch of gravel beneath my shoes echoed in the still air. At the front door, I did what I had been ordered to do. I knelt. My knees pressed into the cold stone. I reached up, trembling, and pressed the bell. In that instant, everything changed. That single, small action, a fingertip on a doorbell, was the line between who I had been and who I would become. My old life ended there. The seconds dragged. Finally, the door opened. I kept my gaze lowered, as instructed, and recited the words I had been told to say. "It is your servant, Sophie, mistress. I am here to serve you." My voice trembled, but it did not break. I saw a pair of long, elegant legs step closer, black heels, 4 inches high, a thin strap curling around the ankle. "Look at me, dear," came the familiar voice. I raised my head and met her eyes for the first time in person. Cold, confident, victorious, eyes that knew I was broken. A slow smile spread across her face. She didn't need to say anything. She knew I would not fight her. Abruptly, she turned on her heel. "Follow me," and shut the door. I obeyed. The house was immaculate, the kind of wealth that whispers rather than shouts. Pale walls, soft carpets, sunlight slanting through high windows. She led me into a large sitting room with French doors that opened onto a manicured garden. In the far corner sat a familiar computer. The same one I'd stared into night after night. The same one that had become the portal to my cage. Miss Rachel sat down on one of the low sofas, her expression unreadable. I knelt instinctively at her feet, every fiber of my being conditioned now to obey. She crossed her legs slowly and leaned forward, the faintest smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You still don't understand what you are, do you?" she asked softly, almost tenderly. But beneath the surface of that calm voice was steel. Before I could respond, she reached forward and grabbed a fistful of my hair, forcing me to look up at her. The gesture wasn't violent, but it was deliberate, a reminder of the power she held. My breath caught in my throat as she stared into my eyes with unsettling intensity. "You exist to serve, Sophie," she whispered. "Not to question. Not to hesitate. To serve." The words weren't shouted, but they echoed in my head like a commandment. I felt my will buckle beneath them. She released my hair and let my face fall forward, the humiliation burning deeper than any physical touch could. I felt small, invisible, like my humanity was slowly being stripped away, piece by piece. She didn't touch me again. She didn't need to. The message had been delivered. I was no longer a participant in this story. I was a prop in hers. When she finally rose to her feet, it was as if nothing significant had happened. "You're a lucky girl, Sophie," she said lightly. "I was going to send you to the supermarket and make you prepare a meal from scratch, but I've decided to be generous. The caterers dropped off the food this morning. All you have to do is heat it, serve it, and make sure tonight runs smoothly." Her tone was calm and polite, almost cheerful, but that only made it more chilling. "Clean yourself up and fix your appearance. My guests will arrive at 6:30. You will greet them at the door, take their coats, and serve the drinks. Dinner will be at 8. Once the table is cleared, you'll wait in the kitchen until I ring for you." She smiled then, a small, satisfied smile that made my stomach knot. "Is that clear, dear? I'm going to rest for a while. Don't disappoint me." And with that, she swept out of the room, leaving me standing there stunned, humiliated, and deeply ashamed. I stared at the empty doorway for a long time before I finally moved. Then, like a machine, I began to work. As I ironed the tablecloth and polished the silverware, a strange thought crossed my mind. This had become my normal. A few weeks ago, I was worried about computer exams and social awkwardness. Now I was preparing for a dinner party in a stranger's house, my entire sense of self rewritten by a woman who treated me like property. And the most terrifying part? Some dark part of me was beginning to accept it. By 6 o'clock, Miss Rachel reappeared elegant and poised in a sleek black silk dress. She inspected the dining room with a critical eye and, for the first time that day, nodded in quiet approval. "You've done well," she murmured. "Pour yourself a small drink if you'd like." It wasn't kindness, it was a calculated gift, a way of binding me tighter to her will. Still, I obeyed, gulping the gin and tonic she allowed me before the doorbell rang. Head up. Shoulders back. Be proud of what you are, Sophie, she said from behind me as I approached the door. I opened it, heart pounding. 7 guests stood on the doorstep, 3 men and 4 women, all dressed impeccably. If they had been warned about me, they gave no sign of it. They handed over their coats without hesitation, barely glancing at me as they walked inside. From that moment on, the night blurred into a whirlwind of tasks, drinks, snacks, oven checks, whispered instructions. Miss Rachel never raised her voice, but a subtle push or a meaningful glance was enough to keep me moving. And slowly, horrifyingly, I realized that the guests didn't see me as a person at all. I was a fixture, a piece of the furniture, a servant. Occasionally, a hand lingered too long as I passed a tray or a careless remark sliced through what little dignity I had left. But mostly, I was invisible, and in some ways, that was worse. Because with every ignored glance, every empty thank you, I felt myself disappear a little more. And beneath it all, a single, relentless thought echoed in my head. This is my life now. And I chose it. I had just returned from the kitchen with the wine when Miss Rachel gave a subtle nod toward Mr. Smith's glass. He was an American guest with a heavy southern drawl and an unsettling smile. I refilled his drink, curtsied, and asked quietly, "Will there be anything else, sir?" He looked me up and down slowly, like I was a display rather than a person. Then, in a voice dripping with mockery, he said, "I think I'd like a little entertainment." I froze. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. But the laughter around the table told me I hadn't. Everyone's eyes were on me. Panic flooded my chest. Miss Rachel's expression hardened. "She's new, Bill." "I apologize," she said smoothly. Then, turning to me, her voice turned cold as steel. "Get on your knees. Now." I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I don't understand," I stammered, but she cut me off. "Do not make me repeat myself, Sophie. You will obey. You want to be pleasing, don't you? You want to be accepted." Her words were laced with poison, manipulative, deliberate. I felt my resolve crumbling. Every fiber of my body screamed to run, yet my feet refused to move. The room was silent. I could feel the weight of every gaze pressing down on me, reducing me to nothing. My hands brushed the satin of my skirt, a costume that suddenly felt like a cage. All the power I thought I had was gone. Slowly, with a sense of numb dread, I knelt. The room erupted into laughter, not because of anything I had done, but because they knew I would do anything. Miss Rachel leaned back, a triumphant smile curling on her lips. "Good girl," she said. "You've repaid my trust in you." I flushed deeply, humiliated beyond words. The evening continued, and I performed my duties with mechanical obedience. When Miss Rachel rang her little silver bell, I returned to clear the plates. But instead of the usual commands, she turned to me with a sinister glint in her eyes. "Tell me, Sophie, what's the capital of Burma?" I'm sorry, miss." "It's a simple enough question, isn't it?" she replied, tilting her head. "Or was your expensive education completely wasted?" I don't know, Mississippi." "Oh dear," she sighed theatrically. "Better take off your apron." Laughter erupted around the table. My stomach twisted as I realized what was happening. This was a game, a twisted one. Each time I failed, a piece of my dignity would be stripped away. And there was nothing I could do. "Every time you enter this room, we'll give you a task," Miss Rachel explained. "It might be a question or a challenge. If you fail, well, there will be consequences. Consider it an incentive to learn." I removed the apron, my face burning as the guests clapped mockingly. By the time dessert was served, I was standing in only a corset, stockings, and heels, a parody of a servant, stripped of my humanity in front of strangers. Miss Rachel ordered me to stand by the window, hands folded, so that I could be summoned at a moment's notice. I stood silently as they discussed me as though I were an object, debating obedience, loyalty, and the nature of discipline, without once acknowledging that I could hear every word. It was the deepest humiliation I had ever experienced. I wasn't a person in their eyes. I was an experiment. A curiosity. A lesson. As the evening dragged on, I began to believe that my ordeal was almost over. But I was wrong. I was summoned to fetch the brandy from the front room. My hands trembled as I carried the tray back, careful not to trip on the rug. But before I could reach the table, one pair of hands seized the tray from me, another grabbed me from behind, pinning my arms to my sides. A third guest took hold of my wrists. I gasped, What are you doing?" Miss Rachel appeared beside me, holding something cold and metallic. "A small demonstration," she said sweetly. "Cooperation is rewarded. Resistance is punished." In seconds, a wide leather belt was buckled around my waist, two short chains connecting it to hand restraints that forced my arms behind my back. My wrists were lifted and locked together. A rigid collar with tiny, sharp points on the inside was secured around my neck, not enough to pierce the skin, but enough to punish even the slightest movement. The message was unmistakable. Don't move. Don't resist. Don't even breathe too deeply. The room erupted into applause. I stood there, restrained, trembling, utterly powerless, as Miss Rachel walked around me in slow, deliberate circles. "Look at her," she said, voice dripping with satisfaction. "Utterly obedient. Completely broken. Exactly as she should be." A hollow silence filled my chest. The realization crashed over me. This wasn't a dinner party. It was a ritual. A performance. And I was the spectacle, a human being stripped of choice, of dignity, of identity, all for their amusement. And the worst part? Deep down, I still wanted her approval. As I was shoved roughly to the floor, the room erupted into cruel laughter. My heart pounded as a row of masked figures stepped forward, not to harm me physically, but to judge me, to degrade me. One by one, they hurled insults, accusations, and humiliating remarks, each one striking deeper than any whip could. I felt like an animal on display, no longer a person, but a curiosity to be mocked and controlled. Every time I tried to avert my eyes, a sharp crack of a riding crop struck the floor beside me, a warning to keep still, to accept whatever came next. My body ached, not from pain, but from the weight of their contempt. Every nerve screamed for this nightmare to stop, yet I knew resistance would only make things worse. The women joined in too, circling me like vultures, forcing me to perform meaningless, degrading tasks. One pinned me with questions designed to humiliate, another ordered me to repeat words that stripped away every shred of dignity I had left. It was relentless, a psychological onslaught designed to break me. And slowly, it was working. By the time they were finished, I was shaking, my body weak, my spirit barely clinging on. My clothes were torn and disheveled from their games, my hair matted, my cheeks stained with tears. And still, it wasn't enough for them. They wanted me completely under their control. Miss Rachel appeared before me, holding a camera. The red recording light blinked in the darkness like a predator's eye. "Smile for the audience," she said coldly. "Every second of this is now evidence. Evidence of who you really are." The room erupted again, laughter, applause, mocking cheers. My humiliation was now documented, weaponized, and ready to be used against me whenever she pleased. I stumbled into a corner, manacles clinking with every step, the weight of my chains heavier than ever. The humiliation clung to me like a second skin, impossible to scrub away. "She shows potential, Rachel," one of the women said. "Perhaps I could borrow her for a while?" A chill went down my spine. The woman's voice dripped with malice. She and her husband had been the cruelest of all, taking pleasure in every ounce of my humiliation. Miss Rachel's lips curled into a satisfied smile. "I'm sure that can be arranged," she said. "Sophie's training has only just begun." That night marked the end of any illusion of freedom. I never returned home. After the guests departed, Miss Rachel sat me down and explained, calmly, as if discussing the weather, that this was all for my own good. She said I needed to face my true nature, to accept what I really was. Resistance, she insisted, was just denial. At first, I fought. I screamed. I insisted I was still a man, that she had no right to do this. I remember once standing in the middle of her kitchen, wearing a ridiculous rubber dress and spiked boots, yelling that I wasn't what she said I was. But my protests meant nothing. The website she had threatened to publish? It went live a few weeks later. And when my family and friends saw it, they turned their backs. They wanted nothing to do with me. Slowly, inevitably, I stopped resisting. I convinced myself she was doing this for me, not to me. I told myself I was lucky that someone cared enough to help me become my true self. Every word of hers became gospel. Every glance of approval, my purpose. And so, my life was rewritten. Every waking moment revolved around her, earning her approval, anticipating her commands, fearing her disapproval. I stopped thinking of escape. I stopped thinking of who I used to be. Years later, as I lay in a hospital bed after a surgery I had once sworn I would never undergo, she was there, smiling, praising me. And I felt grateful. Grateful for the chains that once horrified me. Grateful for the control that had consumed my life. Now, as I hear a knock on the door and my bridesmaid enters radiant in her dark blue gown, I rise to my feet. The car is waiting. The ceremony is about to begin. And with a strange, hollow calm, I walk toward the door to embrace my new life. Somewhere deep inside, a voice is still screaming. But it's faint now, a ghost of the person I once was, drowned beneath layers of conditioning and control.